When you walk along the boulevard now and you see the MP44 or this car here, how beautiful or not do they look to you? How near perfection are they?
I think whenever you work on something, you only see the bad points about them. But obviously the cars are so simple now. If you look at the more modern cars, there's a beauty in their simplicity, I think, and that's all we knew at the time. The budgets were a lot smaller, and the use of carbon fibre was still fairly in its infancy in those days. We obviously had it for the chassis and wing components, but allowing us to move into suspension and more complex mouldings, it's just changed the whole nature of the sport. And I think the biggest change nowadays is that the car just evolves a lot, race by race, whereas we almost do more in 2 races now than we did in the whole year back in those days. So the whole concept of how you design and evolve the car is very, very different.
Male mould chassis. McLaren, correct me if I'm wrong here, maybe the last team to adapt a female mould?
We were. That was how the original car was conceived back in 1981 when John Barnard did that first carbon chassis, and it worked quite well for us. So we continued with that up until the 1991 car, and then we changed for 1992. So I think we were the only people making it in that manner in those days. So perhaps it became a little bit old-fashioned at that point, but it was quite an easy design and manufacturing process, and allowed us to concentrate more on some of the other aspects of the car.
And you were around McLaren when the active ride systems began to develop?
We only ever raced an active car in 1993.
And why was that?
We'd been working on a project with Honda in that period, and that was very, very slow moving, to be fair. It was a very complex system, not unlike the system Lotus were using, and it just took a long time to get some energy into it. Then Honda disappeared, so we had to do something fairly quickly ourselves, and we literally in the space of 2 or 3 months we designed and built an active system, a lot simpler version, which was just ready in time to run on the first test with the 93 car, and we raced that for the whole year. But it was very simple but very easy to work with, and I think by the end of the year we'd honed that to perfection really, and the car was actually a lot quicker as a chassis, I think, than the Williams was, which had a much more complex system.
And if we look at these cars here now, and other cars with which you've been involved, can I ask you again, any soft spots in terms of walking along the boulevard, cars you warm to your heart?
I think my favourite car of the ones I've been directly involved in is probably the 93 car, which partly for the reasons we've just been talking about with the active ride, but it had a lot of toys and interesting mechanical devices on it, which were all banned at the end of that year. And it was a relatively simple car, despite that, relatively cheap to make. But it was just a good car. It wasn't the most successful car, but I think it was, as an engineer, it was probably the nicest car that we did in that period. I haven't actually been hands-on doing that sort of work for a long time now, but again, I think if you look at the cars, like the one beside us here, that there's a huge amount of space in the side pods, and the cars were a lot less complex, and it was still largely drawn by hand. So you had to allow for much bigger clearances, but I think if you look at 2018 car, the packaging to me is absolutely unbelievable. The job that guys have done in putting a lot of complex systems and components into an incredibly small aerodynamic space is actually wonderful, and you couldn't have done that with a small staff of people and drawing by hand.